Trustees March meeting. I'm a relatively new face for the day since our chairwoman is losing her voice. So bear with us as we manage this transition for the day. I'd like to welcome you all. I'd especially like to welcome our new trustees. We have 3 new trustees joining us today for their first meeting. Wenda Fong, Jack McGrory, and Chris Steinhauser. And actually, for the first time in quite some time, we are at full capacity at this board. So we welcome them. You'll have an opportunity tomorrow during our plenary session to offer a few comments and introduce the CSU system and everyone who's watching on the internet. A few comments about yourself and what we should know and what we look forward to for your participation. But welcome. With that, I'd like to quickly move forward. And Trustee Taylor, I'd like to ask you to convene the Committee on Finance to begin our day.
Thank you, Vice Chair Day, and good morning, everybody. Calling the Committee on Finance to order. We have 11 requests this morning for public comment. Each speaker will be limited to 2 minutes to address the board. And I'd like to first call up our students from SQE to the microphone. Yazdalin Ramirez from Dominguez Hills, Courtney Yamagawa from Long Beach, Kelsey Baird from San Marcos, Maurice Mendoza from San Diego State, and Brittany Goss from Fullerton. You can take yourself in whatever order you think makes sense.
Hello, my name is Yoselin. I'm from Dominguez Hills and I'm part of SQE. DH is currently looking for a new campus president, and we, the students, want to see someone who will represent the students, not run the school as a business model, but realize that education is a right, not a privilege that only a few can afford. We want someone who will help us free the CSU from student debt, from tuition increases, and from discrimination. We want a president who will lobby on our behalf to the state legislatures to ensure sustainable funding for the CSU system and for DH. This way, the students can focus on our studies and we can graduate faster. We ask you, the Board of Trustees, to ensure that our next president represent who DH is and understand who we are. We want someone who is committed to our social justice history and supports the students as they lead the school to create the new leaders of a more just tomorrow. We invite you and the future president to join us on April 4th as we ask the state for more funding for the CSU system so we can prevent another tuition increase. So we can prevent the burden of funding for the CSU on the students and go back to sustainable funding from the state. Only by working together can we create a sustainable CSU system that prevents us from making these harsh choices that pin us against each other as funding sources for something that should not fall on our backs to begin with. This can be one way you can justify your increasing salaries as students are struggling to pay between books and their meals. We cannot afford the tuition increases, not now, not tomorrow, and not ever. We demand a quality education that's affordable for all students, not a select few. Help us fund the dream on April 4th. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Courtney. I'm a student at Cal State Long Beach. I saw in the agenda packet that you'll be bringing up the sustainable financial model, which calls for annual modest and predictable fee increases. While I appreciate you making an effort to try to make the increases as relieving as possible, this is not what you should be advocating for. You should be advocating for more state funding for a sustainable way for the state to fund it, not the students. And we've seen a shift in the legislature to favor higher ed. Last week, a coalition of bipartisan legislators spoke in favor of funding higher ed and proposed a plan that would give the CSU $263 million. This shows that we have supporters in the state who are willing to fund us, but we have to show them that we are not just going to automatically put the financial burden onto students, which is what the sustainable model is calling for. We need to be advocating together and sticking up for the CSU. We have to fight for what we believe in, a fully funded CSU that provides equitable opportunities for all Californians. Furthermore, we need to look into other methods of funding. Something that Long Beach's president, President Connolly, brought up to ASI is a ballot initiative called the College for All Act. The College for All Act would establish an estate tax to fund higher ed, thus eliminating the problem that we always have with not having enough resources. And with the midterm elections this year, we have a political climate in California that's conducive to this type of change. We should harness this energy and push once and for all a sustainable method of state funding. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Baird and I go to Cal State San Marcos. And I'm speaking to you all today about the proposed tuition increase for next year. And I know that you've been tasked with this very important decision, and that you know that your role holds an impact, both in the short term on this decision, and it has long-standing consequences. These decisions are momentous, and they come with a great amount of deliberation, and I'm sure that you're aware of the weight of your responsibility. Because I'm asking you to meet us and see where we're coming from, I want to do the same, and I want to meet you and see where you're coming from, and also understand your dilemma. So I know that your role is not easy, and you are tasked with making this decision about the fate of thousands of lives who are among the most vulnerable in our public school system, and who are at this moment being systematically attacked from every angle because of their race, because of their lack of income or generational wealth, who work 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and must maintain a full-time schedule. And I know that this is not easy. A lot of my mentors who are leaders in their community attended CSUs in the 80s, in the 90s, and in the 70s, when California had arguably the best and most affordable public education system in the world. Some of you are public educators yourself, and you're public administrators, and you understand the gravity of balancing public budgets, and you come at this task knowing that you cannot make everyone happy, because inevitably California will reach another budgetary shortfall. Although we are at a surplus right now, we have to look at the long term. And I want you all to know that we're looking at the long term too. We're looking at the ways towards systematic change to fund our public institutions through overturning Prop 13, for example. And so we're all in solidarity on this, in the long term and in the short term. For now, today, we have to work on these policy obstacles, and you have to understand that you're setting a precedent with your decision that affects those at the bottom who receive very little protection. Before speaking with you, I did my due diligence, and I asked leaders in my community who attended these CSUs, would you do it today? With the private debt, with the multiple jobs, with the assaults wielded you on campuses, and 2 out of 4 of them said, no, I couldn't do it today. So at this point, apologize. It's not a matter of foregoing pizza parties for us. It's a matter of life and death. We live on a $25 margin, many of us. We work multiple jobs. We have disabilities. We take care of children. We take care of elders. We struggle. We do full-time coursework. We are trying our hardest, and it's a matter of eating and living, and $200-something is everything. This decision is impactful. And I ask you to ask yourself this question if you would attend a CSU today. With these terms. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Maurice Mendoza, and I'm a 5th-year double majoring in sustainability and American Indian Studies at San Diego State University. I'm a descendant of the Nez Perce and Yakima people, as well as the Tongva people, whose very land that we're standing on, that my ancestors once stood on, and we're all standing on today. So in many Native cultures, we have a philosophy of the 7 generations. We reflect on the previous 3 generations and how their decisions impacted our current generation's existence. And we, as the 7th generation, do the same for how our decisions are going to impact the next 3 generations. Therefore, we consider ourselves the 7th. The concept of sustainability, again, is yet another one that Native people, we cultivated and perfected thousands of years ago, although we get no credit for it. And it's because for, the genocide of my ancestors, because of that, for all intents and purposes, I wasn't meant to be here. I'm sorry. Because of that, I wasn't meant to be here to be able to speak to you today. And it's because of that that I plan on holding myself accountable for the decisions that I make as a Native individual for future generations. The very definition and the concept of sustainability is to live in a way that meets the needs of the present people without sacrificing the needs of future generations to be able to meet those needs. I'm sorry. We often associate the concept of sustainability with our planet, but I can tell you that the $30,000 of debt that I'm in and the 5 years that I've spent mastering this subject have taught me that it's a very multifaceted concept and that it can be applied to any issue. including increasing tuition in the CSU. Sorry, that always gets me very emotional. It's with great confidence that I can say your Sustainable Financial Model Task Force report recommendations are far from being ethically sustainable by application of the very definition of the term. The future CSU students are continuing to be failed with every tuition hike that you approve, even your modest and predictable ones. As you all grow increasingly more reliant on the wages of my 45-hour workweek paychecks and those of hundreds of thousands of other students alike, the CSU just continues to grow more inaccessible. Please tell me in what ways are tuition hikes a sustainable financial model when student homelessness and hunger are at an all-time high. In no way or frame does cultivating homelessness and hunger meet the definition standards of sustainability, as it directly compromises the ability of future generations to meet their own needs because they continue to have to fund to meet your needs. Tuition hikes are not a sustainable finance model, so don't paint them as such, please. This is not the CSU system that the next 3 generations needs, and this isn't the CSU system that I know. Myself, as a Native individual, we only make up 1% of the population. And it's so hard for us to have to fight to be here, and all you're continuing to do is weed us out one by one. So please, keep in mind, as someone who's put myself into immense debt in order to master this topic of sustainability, I've provided you with the definition, and you should all know that this isn't sustainable at all. So please keep that in mind.
Thank you, Marissa. Brittany?
Hello, my name is Brittany Goss. I'm from Cal State Fullerton. I work on average 50 hours a week to take care of myself and my mom and my 10-year-old brother. And I am one of over 1,000 people who are going to be going to Sacramento on April 4th to fight for full funding for the CSU. And we're telling Governor Brown that we need full funding. We need him to fund the dream for the CSU for all of us. Students are sacrificing the little time they have to show up. They're giving up hours at work. They're giving up time that they could be studying because we're done. This is enough. And we're getting on a bus for over 10 hours to go up to Sacramento to show up in masses. We're showing up in masses because we've reached a critical point. Students cannot and we will not take another tuition increase. We can't afford another $200 that could be going to bills, rent, books, food, anything else. And all that because those in our system can't get any creative and figure out another solution. And what we're missing from this movement is our representatives. And we've saved you all a spot on our bus. We made a bus outside. Y'all can go out there and see it. We did some arts and crafts for you, so that way you can visualize going with us and seeing what you can do. And we're inviting you to stand with the students that you're representing, because your decisions directly impact the students, not you. It is not $200 coming out of your pocket. It's not $200 coming out of your salary. It's $200 coming out of mine. And you tell us every year that you feel so bad, you feel so guilty that it hurts you to do this to your students, but it's not you who's paying the price, it's us. And it's time for you to prove it. It's time for you to show that we matter more to you than just an ATM, that you actually care about us being successful, and that it doesn't matter to you to do this to us time after time every single year, while you do not feel the impact of this, while you have your mansion and your salary and your comfort that you have worked for, but help us get to a point where we can work for it too. So we're on the same side here. We all know that the state needs to fund the CSUs. You have told us over and over again that it's not your fault, it's the state's fault. So let's work together on this. Let's go and put pressure on the governor. Let's do what Gavin Newsom said last year and get creative and put that pressure on there. So come stand with your students. We need to combine our efforts and combine our resources to actually make this happen and create a sustainable model to get that dedicated source of funding from the state and show them that we are not messing around this time. So we're providing you with the platform to stand with your students once and for all. April 4th, Sacramento, 10 a.m. in front of the legislative building. You all have gotten invitations made by your students to invite you to come with us. You can RSVP at freethecsu.org and show us that you want to help fund our dreams because you do care about us. We assume that you take these positions because you care about the state of the CSU and you care about your students. So this is your way to do it. Do it on our terms. Meet us out there. Don't make us come into your little ivory tower and talk to you and beg for you to help. Come out there with us and stand with us in person. So
Thank you,
the
Brittany.
only thing left for you to consider is if you will do it. If you will show us that you care, if you'll stand with us, or if you'll leave us to fight for our education ourselves.
Thank you. All right, we have 6 more speakers. They can come up in any order. Father William Connor, Jennifer Egan, Michele Henderson, John Brushy, Tim Sistrunk, and Chris Brown. And make sure to turn the microphone on and introduce yourself, please.
I am Father William Connor. I am the pastor emeritus of St. Joseph Catholic Church here in Long Beach, and presently visiting priest at St. Pancratius Catholic Church in nearby Lakewood. I also represent thousands of faith leaders across Southern California through Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice. Our Cal State University system has a high percentage of students of low income, both white and of color, including DACA students who are already vulnerable to economic instability, starvation, and homelessness. Many of these students from working class families have to work not only to pay for their college tuition, housing, and food, but also to support their immigrant families while trying to excel in their classes. Continually raising tuition does not make the Cal State University system the people's university. Instead, it contributes to keeping students in California out of higher education. Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior, states, "Whatever you do for the least of your brothers and sisters, you do it for me. Whatever you fail to do for the least of your brothers and sisters, you fail to do it for me." Our financially stretched students are the least of our brothers and sisters in the Cal State University system. I urge you to work with Cal State Faculty Association, Students for Equitable Education, and other community advocates in order to create a fully funded Cal State University budget for the good of our community. Yours is a moral statement regarding priorities that affect the future of California and of many poor immigrant and working class students made in the image and likeness of God.
Thank you, Father Connor.
Thanks, Father Will. Good morning. I'm Jennifer Egan, president of CFA. And I understand at the last Board of Trustees, there was a call to do things differently. And you heard from the students. We don't want a replay of the student fee increase. So to that end, consider this your formal invitation from CFA. For everyone in this room, absolutely everyone, the chancellor, trustees, campus presidents, MPPs, staff, absolutely everyone, to come with us and stand with the students and faculty on April 4th in Sacramento at the Capitol as we escalate our campaign for more funding for the CSU. That's Wednesday, April 4th. Get out your calendars. Wednesday, April 4th, from 10 to 2 on the north lawn of the state capitol. We're going to have some very cool art installations. We're going to have some speakers, some spoken word poetry, even some dance, and tacos. You should not forget the tacos. It's going to be fun. It's going to be uplifting, but with a very serious message. We must get more money into the CSU system. We know what it looks like when we have a disastrous budget. It hurts our students, and it is simply unacceptable. We are not having it. And, we're providing transportation on buses from all the campuses. All you have to do is lend us your physical presence. CFA and our student activists will take care of all the logistics. All you have to do is show up. I think we've recently seen the power of protests nationally and the importance of people coming together physically in the same space to send a message. Let's do this together. It's time. Now is not the time to be timid or be worried about how the message is framed or to quibble about this number versus that number as an excuse for inaction. Now is the time to join forces in a powerful way to protect what we all love, the university and our students. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. I'm Tim Sistrunk. I'm the chapter president of the Chico State CFA. And I wanted to as a context to thinking about heading out on April 4th to all stand together on behalf of the CSU, I wanted to think about first steps a little bit, that we should basically declare a moratorium on tuition hikes and a moratorium on student fees. And student fees seem to be happening across the system in different ways. Student fee increases, adding increases that are beyond our most vulnerable students. At Chico State, the estimates are about 10% of our student population is housing insecure. About 41.6% of our student population suffers food insecurity. That means choices between textbooks, tuition, and food, and that impacts coursework. That impacts the life of the CSU. So given the enormity of the challenges faced by our students, I think it's time we hear in this body that we say, we'll have a moratorium on fees, we'll have a moratorium on tuition increases. The fees in my university, they're contemplating fee increases of $180 per semester. That doesn't sound that excessive from a certain perspective, but that is a lot of money, $360 a year added tuition. That brings our fees to about $1,000 per semester. So that kind of addition on student working life as they're trying to make their way through the university for health center care, for what are called student success initiatives, which seem to be pretty discretionary, and then athletics. Our system, we fund those inadequately, it's clear, but we have cost of CPI increases built into the fees we had. So it seems exactly the wrong time to be talking about fee increases at our university and elsewhere in the system. So there was an attempt to launch what's called alternative consultation to get student input through various different ways. And that has turned into a process that has been divisive in our community, divisive to our students, divisive to among faculty, and that seems like that's not the way to go. We should have leadership from this body to consider systematically the fact that the state and the governor are not fully funding the public trust that we're all dedicated to.
Hey, Dr. Sistrunk, can you wrap up if you don't
We need
mind?
to work on maintaining the educational mission to give future generations the tools to work in to sustain our future. We need to be more creative, thinking about problem solving altogether. If you ever met a student who was so dedicated to education that they chose to skip meals, you would know what to do. You would join me. We would all join together in this public purpose together. So I hope we can.
Thank you.
Hello, my name's John Brushy. I'm a graduate of the CSU system, and for the last 20 years I've been a professor at Fullerton, primarily as their debate coach. In 2004, I was the National Debate Coach of the Year, and in 2014, I won the National Lifetime Service Award. But as with all professors, my best accomplishments are my students. I'd like to share you the stories of two of them. When I met Cameron Ward, he was a 17-year-old. He'd been kicked out of his house. He was living on a friend's couch. He was nowhere near graduation. Within 4 years, he beat Harvard University at the national championship on national television, and he's currently running a nonprofit in Los Angeles to create debate opportunities for other students who are just like him. Brenda Montez, when I met her, had an alcoholic absentee father. She was the primary caregiver both for her mother and for her brother who had cancer, but as a first-generation student, she got into UCLA Law School, is now an immigration lawyer. Every time she walks into a courtroom, she faces a 90% chance of losing. She's had 300 clients, and she has never lost. I'm going to repeat that again, just in the hopes that if I keep saying it out loud enough, I can believe it. She's had 300 clients. She has a 90% chance of losing, and she has never lost. My students give me undue credit. Brenda asked me to walk her down the aisle at her wedding. Cameron asked me to officiate his. They fled me in box on Father's Day, which is a way of saying I have the best job in the world. But with all professors, I have learned more from them than I have taught them. And what they taught me is never to let the odds intimidate them. Cameron never calculated what are the chances that a high school dropout could beat Harvard. Brenda's never calculated the odds of doing what she's done. I did once. It has 23 zeros in it. And I just want to say that every year that we continue to follow the regressive trend. There are the same regressive forces that are rolling back civil rights and environmental gains have a plan for higher education, and it involves defunding higher education and shifting the burden to the students. And that's been our trend, and we've been following it for too long, and every year it gets a little harder for me to make those connections, for my students to face the odds. So what concerns me now is that when I hear our leaders speak, it sounds like a concession speech. This is the new normal. No one's going to give us the money back. We have to do more with less. We live in a new reality. Well, those of us who would seek to lead must have at least as much courage as the students that we ask to follow us, and we must not let those odds intimidate us. I have seen our students be able to overcome these odds, and I know that we can do it if we work together to make it happen. As the bluest state in the nation, we should have a more progressive vision for higher education, and I hope that you'll join us and the students in making that a reality.
Thank you, Dr. Brushy.
Good morning. My name is Michele Henderson, and I am a lecturer with the Cal State Teach program at Cal State LA and a second-generation CSU alumni from Cal State LA. There is so much that I'd like to say to you about the budget and funding. I want to tell you that the state should fully fund the CSU, but you already know that. I want to tell you that the legislature and the governor, what they should do about it, but you already know that. And because my time is limited, I won't tell you that you can be better advocates for fully funding the CSU, because you already know that. But I will tell you what you can do to be better advocates. You see, it's great that you send your staff and your lobbyists to Sacramento, but true advocates would make a case in person, as I am doing with you today. So please, be true advocates to the CSU, as I and many of my fellow faculty and students are doing, by going in person to the Capitol on April 4th to speak with the legislators about the importance of fully funding the CSU. Can you imagine the impact of that? I can. If the CSU, if California does not adequately fund public higher ed, the CSU can't be sustained, but you know that. California has a $7 billion surplus coming in. And so there's no better time than the present for the CSU to get money to expand our course selections, admit qualified students, and graduate the students that are currently enrolled. I like to think that, like me, you lose sleep over this. That, like me, you are frustrated about this. And like me, you truly want to do something. If we work together to increase state funding to the CSU would be better for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Henderson.
Good morning, trustees, presidents, colleagues, and students. My name is Gregory Christopher Brown. I'm an associate professor of criminal justice at Cal State Fullerton, and I serve as the CFA chapter president. I received a California State public education. I was born to a 13-year-old mother. I was the first one in my family to attend a four-year college university, so I appreciate and understand the importance of education. I'm here today to ask you, if not now, then when? If we do not get better funding for this public higher education now, when the state has a $7 billion surplus, then when will the CSU get better funding? If California does not invest in our students now, then when will that happen? During economic downturns, we heard, too bad, no money. We pointed out that's wrong, since having educated people helps solve that. At the same time, we could reasonably expect that now that there is money, we will see the investment restored and even stepped up. We have downturns. We will have downturns again, and we will hear the excuses again. Right now, the excuses are so weak, they're not acceptable. This is not acceptable at all. And if not now, then what does that say about California's leaders? We hear some people arguing, well, times have changed, as though that is an excuse for not funding the CSU. And it's true, times have changed. In the past, our student body was 70% or more white, and now you know there was money in the CSU, in good times and bad times then. Now our students are more than 70% students of color. That is a change, an important change. And now they say the money is not there, even with the $7 billion surplus. Well, I would say there's something about our California leaders, and I challenge you in this room to figure out what that is. So let me ask one more question. If not now, then when is the right time for the people in this room, the people who California calls trustees and presidents, to go out and fight for our students? And remember, they are your students too. If you really take your responsibility seriously, you'll take that to heart. There is no honor or respect in overseeing the CSU system while it gets whittled down with only quiet complaints. I know you don't like it either, but you will not have honored the trust of the people in your care if you do not speak out about this loudly and strongly.
Thank you, Dr. Brown, for your compelling comments. Very much appreciated.
The state of California, our governor, and above all, need to commit to fund this university, to invest in our students' dreams and everyone's futures. We all need to work together to change this direction, and we will not do it without you. You, however, have to take an outspoken stand. I will be in Sacramento on April the 4th, my birthday, demanding more funding. Will you join me and let your voice be heard too? Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you again to all the speakers for your comments today. Members, it is now time for the committee to consider today's consent agenda. We only have one item on the consent agenda. Does any member wish to remove that item from the consent agenda for further discussion? Well, hearing no such request, are there any objections to approval of our one item on the consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved. Remember, we have 3 additional items today. They're all information items. A couple of these will require action at a later time, but today they're just information. Why don't we start off with information item number 3. It's an establishment of a new CSU Doctor of Audiology tuition rate. The item will be presented by our CFO, Steve Rellier, and Assistant Vice Chancellor for Budget, Ryan Storm. Dr. Rellier, please begin.
Thank you, Chair Taylor. This is an information item to establish a tuition rate for all Doctor of Audiology programs that would be offered by the CSU. An action item will be presented at the May board meeting. I will now ask Ryan Storm, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Budget, to present this item. Ryan?
Thank you, Steve. In 2016, Governor Brown signed into law Assembly Bill 2317, which expanded CSU's degree granting authority to include the Doctor in Audiology. At the March 2017 board meeting, the Committee on Education Policy recommended, and the board approved, changes to the CSU Academic Master Plan that authorizes campuses to develop Doctor of Audiology programs. With only 2 Doctor of Audiology programs offered in California today, California's public and private higher education institutions currently do not supply enough of these programs to meet the growing demand for audiologists. Also, advances in diagnosis and treatment of patients across the lifespan are expected to increase demand for more of these programs in the coming decade. Most audiologists work in healthcare facilities or for schools and school districts and have an average salary of $95,000 in California. 4 CSU campuses are planning to start programs in the next few years, with the first being California State University, Los Angeles in the fall of 2018. So last year, the Committee on Education Policy considered the policy of establishing a Doctor of Audiology program. Today, it is the Committee on Finance's turn. This committee is responsible for reviewing and ultimately recommending establishing new rates of tuition for new programs. Staff have thoroughly examined the costs of one of the 2 audiology programs in the state, which is a joint venture by UC San Diego and San Diego State University. Based on that analysis, staff proposes a tuition rate of $7,371 per term. This will keep the total program price at or below the cost of the UC San Diego, San Diego State program, as required by statute, while still supplying campuses the resources necessary to build quality programs that meet the accreditation requirements of the field. Additionally, at that level, staff does not anticipate that new audiology programs will draw resources away from campus resources already dedicated to undergraduate CSU students. The program will span 4 years, including 3 summer terms, for a total of 11 terms. Over that 4-year period, the total program cost to students would be $81,081. While that total cost would seem high, keep in mind that doctoral candidates would receive a highly specialized education, and the lifetime earning potential for audiologists is quite high relative to many other professions. And we will bring this back to the board in May for final action. Dr. Christine Mallon, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Academic Programs and Faculty Development, and I are available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Very good. Thanks very much. Members, welcome to questions. I'm going to start with just a couple clarifying matters. Again, Ryan, you alluded to this. Nothing in this program will detract from our ability to deliver quality undergraduate education on our campuses.
That's correct.
Secondly, I just want to be clear, it wasn't clear to me in the materials, the San Diego State program with UCSD will continue? So in
Yes.
effect, we'll have 5 campuses who are participating in the Doctor of Audiology endeavors, 1 in a joint program with UCSD, and then 4 on our own.
Correct.
Okay, great. And then lastly, the last page of your write-up, page 3, item number 5, we talk about a mandatory financial aid set aside from student AUD tuition of 25%. Is this a mini SUG program?
It's aligned very similarly to our other doctoral programs that we already offer at the university. The one thing that I would note with this is that it provides the campuses the flexibility in order to offer financial aid to as many students that need it as possible. So that's the intent behind the item there.
And my only concern, and it's honestly a concern with the entire SUG program, are we going to ask some students to afford the $81,000 over 4 years? In effect, will they have to take out student debt, and then part of the debt proceeds will be used to provide financial aid for other students? In other words, some students have to take out more debt than they might otherwise in order to provide grant aid to lower income students. Are we disadvantaging the middle class student through this mini SUG program in a way that allows us to provide financial aid to others?
Certainly, you could interpret it that way. I think one of the things that you want to keep in mind is that this program and the way that it's structured is very similar to other doctoral programs. And what it does is it provides campuses the ability to offer a SUG-like program for these programs. They're typically pretty small, so it will depend on that pool of students whether there are folks who are of significant financial need. So it'll vary, but it gives some flexibility to campuses as they develop these brand new programs, that they can have some flexibility in terms of how they operate the program.
I guess my concern is broader than that, Ryan. Anybody who's studied the very troubling trends in student debt outstanding and the growth in student debt outstanding over the last several years know that it's graduate students who are taking on the boatload of that new debt that has seen such an explosion over the last several years, because graduate education is just incredibly expensive. And I'm worried that, even though these are great jobs that people get, will they be able to service that debt that might be required by virtue of going through this program.
If I could address that.
Please.
When we looked at DNP, Doctor of Nursing Practice, and Doctor of Physical Therapy, the DPT programs, and also had the Legislative Analyst Office and Department of Finance look at it, the debt that our students left with, they found was reasonable across comparison with graduate programs in general, not just in the CSU. And again, the relatively higher salary is something that's discussed nationally when we talk about the cost of these programs.
All right, we have a question from Trustee Sebelius and then Trustee Fagan.
Hello. Before this item comes back to the board as an action item, I presume in May, can we change number 4 of the conclusions on tuition? That's on page 3, point 4. It now reads proposals to the trustees to increase the CSU Doctor of Audiology tuition rate will be based on program costs and so on. I suggest to change the word increase to adjust because that leaves both ways open. I'm an optimist.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee Sebelius. Trustee Fagan.
Ryan, I gather you've stated a number of times in here that this is apparently self-sustaining. And I just want to get in these, shall we say, troubled times of expenses. I think, and this is a relatively small program. Nevertheless, I think we should be looking at every single item these days as to make it clear what impact it's going to have on our budget. And so I just want to make sure that I understand from you and your assurance now that this is totally self-sustaining based on tuition, and under no circumstances will it be any drain of anything on current revenues, expenses, budgets, anything.
As your budget guy, I'm very much aware of the challenges that we have without a doubt. And one of the things that we did very firmly was look at these costs and look very closely at them. And so I feel very comfortable that we will be in a self-sustaining situation here.
So the answer is there is no. Very comfortable is almost there, but can you make it a little more specific?
Well, if you're looking for a bona fide guarantee, I cannot guarantee something 100%. So that's one thing that I get questioned a lot while I'm in Sacramento is can I guarantee a lot of things? Obviously, the world is, it is what it is, and sometimes things could change. But I would say based on the information we have today, based on the information we have from that joint doctoral program, I feel very comfortable with it.
Okay, Lieutenant Governor Newsom.
Could I just add one thing to Doug's question? I'm sorry to jump on everybody else. There will be a cost, Doug, associated with staff and leadership time in developing the program that will be supported by general fund. It's not an added cost, it'll be part of their duties. But I just wanted to be clear that costs of delivering the program are penciled out to be self-sustaining, as Ryan said. But some of the developmental costs, some president's time, provost time, et cetera, will be, just to be clear.
But that's the setup costs and initial getting it going, and it's
no additional
minor.
cost. It'll be part of people's time. Yeah.
Lieutenant Governor Newsom.
Yeah, ironically, opposite perspective on the question that was posed, and that is it's a full dollar cheaper than the joint partnerships with UC and the privates. And so my question is, are we over exuberant in terms of the tuition? Why are we going to the max allowable pursuant to the legislation? And I'm curious, it goes to a more perhaps detailed analysis of the previous question and comment. What is the financial model here? And frankly, do we have to begin with the max tuition in mind as opposed to some variant or phasing?
The tuition that we've set is, as you've noted, $1 less than at San Diego. But the only other program in the state is $123,000, more than $123,000 to complete the program. It's only a 3-year program. Our program is a 4-year program. And the difference between the future programs in AUD and the existing one in San Diego has to do with size. San Diego State limits theirs to a cohort of 10 students, and the other campuses have a greater demand and greater capacity for clinical placements, and so they expect that their cohorts could be 19 to 25 students, so it would be at a greater cost. So we will keep in touch with, these are state-supported programs. They are not self-support programs, but we intend to cover the costs through the fees we set.
I think the other thing I'd like to add in too is that while this is the starting point of this particular tuition rate, obviously over time things could change going forward as compensation costs increase over time and as program costs develop over time. I don't want you to be left with the impression that this is the tuition rate locked in perpetuity, that as inflationary costs increase like you deal with on other areas of the budget, just want to put that on the record that we will likely be coming back in future years, perhaps, to adjust this if necessary. As Trustee Sibilia said, we will adjust. We won't necessarily increase, but we'll have to, deal with the different cost implications as we go forward. So I just want to bring that up to your attention.
And forgive me, through the chair, just a quick clarification for my own edification. Is the legislation statutorily stipulates that it cannot be more expensive than the joint partnership with UC or more expensive than University of Pacific or any other comparable offering?
Specifically, it says the University of California programs, including the joint program at UC San Diego and San Diego State, and that is the only public program in the state.
Got it. So it's capped to that. That's the dollar delta. All right.
I've got Trusteeeisen and then Trustee Campbell.
So to begin, apologies for my voice. I'm interested in something different than the financial model. It sounds as if at some point in time there was a recognition that there was a workforce need for additional audiologists, and that was not currently being met by the programs that existed. And the CSU stepped up to offer to help with that particular workforce need. I'm wondering, and maybe this goes to the another committee and not finance, but I'm wondering if there are other programs that we are looking to add to what we can contribute with respect to the workforce needs besides this particular program.
We've been involved in discussion about AUD programs for 12 years. When accreditation and licensure requirements changed to require doctoral programs for entry into practice in audiology. And we didn't have the authority from the legislature to offer independent doctoral degrees. And we've been watching the workforce demands. They retain this very high imbalance between how many audiologists are needed in the state and how many actually are produced. And, we see from San Diego State, it's 10 a year. Legislation came through not from the CSU for this program, and we think that the same may happen for Doctor of Occupational Therapy. We will watch the UC and see if they develop programs, but licensure is going to change in that field, also requiring a doctoral degree for people to be licensed and enter into clinical practice.
Great. Trustee Campbell, and then we'll probably wrap. Members, remember, this is a information item. We'll get another bite at this apple come May.
I just want to make a comment about the debt load that students carry, and in regards to this particular program, I just feel comfortable, though it seems high, that my understanding is rule of thumb, usually you want to keep a debt to around what your yearly salary will be. So, I mean, I think if students if graduates are coming out making close to $100,000, that it's something that they can comfortably handle, versus if you're graduating with a degree, perhaps, where you will be, starting at $25,000. So looking at this particular degree, and I know that there is a demand for audiologists in the state. I feel comfortable with the program at that rate.
Okay. Again, members, we will have an opportunity to address this again in May. Good feedback. And I'm sure the staff will take the considerations into account, and we'll have another discussion in a couple of months. If it's all right, we'll move on to item number 4. Our next item is an update on the status of the Sustainable Financial Model Task Force Report recommendations presented by Steve Rollier, our CFO. Steve, please begin.
Thank you, Trustee Taylor. This information item is a brief update on the progress made on the Sustainable Financial Model Task Force report that was presented to the board in 2016. Next slide. In October of 2014, the Chancellor formed a task force co-chaired by 2 campus presidents and myself. The charge to the task force was to propose the elements of a sustainable financial model for the university, recognizing the changes in state funding for higher education and our inability to meet demands by qualified students. The report was presented to the Board of Trustees in draft form at the January 2016 meeting, revised based on that discussion, and then presented in final form at the March 2016 meeting. This past fall, the Chancellor formed a work group to obtain updates on the initiatives related to the task force report recommendations. Attachment A in your board packet is the letter sent by the work group to the Chancellor summarizing results of the work group review and providing the current status of each of the 21 recommendations that were included in the March 2016 task force report. The task force recommendations fell in the major areas that are shown on this slide, which include how do we increase the effectiveness of how we manage our resources, how do we better manage our costs, how do we improve our internal allocation processes, and how can we increase and diversify our revenue sources. All of this in the context of supporting a quality education and student achievement. The Sustainable Financial Model Report presented 21 recommendations that affected short-term and long-term reductions in expenditures and increases in revenues. Most of the recommendations have been completed or are considered on an ongoing basis as part of the annual budget process, and 2 of the recommendations are in process, meaning that efforts are underway to implement aspects of the report recommendation. The remaining recommendations warrant ongoing reevaluation as state fiscal circumstances evolve. The details on each recommendation can be found in your agenda material. Beyond the 21 recommendations provided in the original task force report, the Chancellor's work group considered other potential opportunities, including designated state revenue streams to support higher education, a future review of possible modifications to the State University Grant Program designed to limit the growth of institutional financial aid, a careful and thorough review of discretionary or outdated academic programs, enrollment reductions, and modifications to defined benefit programs that provide lower cost alternatives, and a multi-year budget forecast that in partnership with the state could support more effective planning, including the development of a long-term tuition policy that would improve the ability of students and their families to plan, as well as to provide additional revenue to support a quality education. I want to thank the members of the work group for the time and attention dedicated to the review of the task force report. And as you'll hear in our next item on the 2018-19 budget, we continue to look for ways to both increase revenue and reduce costs while maintaining academic excellence for all of our students. That concludes the update, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Rollier. Members, now we'll open it up for thoughts, comments, questions, concerns. We have Trustee Nyland, followed by Trustee Carney.
Thank you, Trustee Taylor. And I would just like to start to say, as a member of this group, I wanted to thank Trustee Carney, Trustee Simon, Trustee Hinton, President Morshita, Tom McCarron, Christine Miller, and Chris Mellon, of course, Steve Rollier and his great staff. This was not an easy task, and singularly, I'd like to thank Peter Taylor, Trustee Taylor, because he led this group, and it took a lot of time and effort on his part, and his expertise was very useful. So I just want to say that, and I think it's important work, and it's work that's been well done. But I think most of us would probably agree that it's a little bit of nibbling around the edges. There's a bigger structural issue. And And I believe we can also agree that we are standing at the precipice of making some draconian cuts to our CSU system at the very time when the state of California has more money to fund higher education than perhaps at any other time in the history of the state of California. And while this plan is necessary and must be implemented, the action steps in this document do not solve our looming budget crisis, nor resolve the fact that a governor, any governor, can jeopardize access to higher education for tens of thousands of Californians simply because he or she chooses to. The framers of the master plan would no doubt be proud of our CSU successes, but would also probably be shocked that the very institutions that created the master plan would so underfund the system that it jeopardizes the very promise that was made 60 years ago. Last year, the CSU turned away around 30,000 otherwise eligible students from accessing our system. And because of this budget crisis, we may be required to roll back enrollments. So this number may grow to 50,000 and maybe next year and maybe 75,000 or greater in the years to come. No doubt, I don't believe the framers of this master plan envisioned that. And I suggest that there's one underlying factor, and there are many, is that in 1978, the voters of California took our state finances in their own hands with the passage of Proposition 13, which fundamentally changed all of state finances. And of course, since 1978, there have been other citizen-driven initiatives to fix parts of Proposition 13 and guarantee funding for very important issues. Unfortunately, not for the CSU. And over the last 2 years, and even today, I've been honored to sit here and I've heard the students and the employees and the presidents and the trustees talk about options for dedicated funding for sustainability. It seems to me that now is the time for us as a governing body to formally consider our options to design and support a structural solution to resolve our unstable revenue sources. And to that end, I'm asking the chair and the chancellor to place on our next agenda an item outlining our options and approaches to achieve this objective. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee Nylon. Thank you, Trustee Nylon, and duly noted, Ms. Kiss, the Secretary of our Board, if you will note that for our May agenda. Thank you. Let's go to Trustee Carney.
Thank you very much for that, Trustee Nylon. That's, we talked about this a lot in the work group, and thank you for bringing that out publicly. I just want to say that I think that there is more benefit to be gained from some of these recommendations. Many have been implemented in part, but not in full and not on every campus. And one recommendation that really has not gotten a lot of traction yet is the one about offering a full summer term. And I have actually heard from meeting with faculty on some campuses that they're interested in this. And I got a little push from them to bring this up, and it's been on my radar anyway. I'm wondering if there is a way to, I realize that we have asked campuses to go through a lot of course redesign and, the GE requirements and remedial education and all. There's a lot of activity, and I'm not trying to add to that burden, but if there is a way of moving this concept forward, if there is a campus or two that would like to kind of try a pilot program, if we could find revenue or specifically ask for revenue to implement this on a couple of campuses and see where we go with that. I would really not like this idea of a full summer term to just drop into, well, we don't have the money, which is true. But I'd like to see us try to move this concept forward in a modest, at least, way to test it out and see if we can get some traction here, see if it turns out to be a good thing that's helpful to students.
Very good. Thank you, Trustee Carney. Members, we certainly have an opportunity to talk about the big budget issue in our next item, but any other comments on the sustainable? Lieutenant Governor Newsom?
Just in broadly, and trying to understand what's the next step with these 21 recommendations? How are we framing this? How are we prioritizing this? How are we getting under the hood, nuancing this, making the points that were made that some campuses are already moving in this direction? What's the thinking?
Yeah. Our task force was a temporary one for a reason of, well, Bagley Clean, among others. It was really an opportunity to look at those recommendations that came out about 2 years ago to see how we were doing. And as you see in the summary, some are doing great. Others have been a little bit more of a struggle. On balance, making pretty good progress. My suggestion to Chancellor White is he maybe reconvene the task force next fall to allow us to check in again and make sure that the progress we've seen continues. As well as, and again, we're going to get into this, I suspect, in the next item, the bigger structural issue that Trustee Nylon mentioned, which is, frankly, can we sustain 23 comprehensive four-year universities on what we're getting? And there's some tough trade-offs to be made, and we need to have a really vibrant discussion around that very topic. So it's bigger than that kind of nibbling. We should nibble when we can and keep that on the radar screen, but the bigger topics have to be addressed, I think, in a bigger session with this board.
Yeah, and just if I may, through the chair, I mean, I hope, because there are a lot of interesting community choice aggregation. There's a lot of interesting things in here that may not generate a lot of energy in the audience or outside.
No pun intended with
these
that
corridors, literal, not figurative energy. Yeah, and I hope. I mean, my point is, thank you for the work. A lot of good a lot of work was done here. A lot of good things are happening, and it would be. I hope we don't lose some of the momentum around some of the specifics here, and we could pick up on each one, sort of, check off on them or check in on them, and move them forward. And of course, we're going through the same process, and you understand better than anyone at UC, and made me think about the collaborative efforts in terms of the work they're doing along these same lines that we're doing independently, and what you're doing, which I imagine is a lot of things we're not even aware of in terms of cross collaboration, in terms of procurement and other strategies, best practice dissemination with the UC system and perhaps the community college system as well. So anyway, I just want to acknowledge the work and extend my hope and appreciation that we can advance a
Absolutely.
dialogue.
I will say that sharing of best practices with the UC, in my, since 2009 when I was neck deep in it, is probably better than it's ever been.
It's good to hear.
And I'm very pleased at the kind of information sharing. It never goes quick enough for me, but there is that regular information sharing that I think is heartening to see, where we're learning from each other. And as we saw with procurement initiative last meeting, actually now leveraging each other's size to drive better deals and save money. Oh,
great.
So members, if it's all right, we'll transition to our last agenda item, which I suspect will generate no controversy. Yes, Trustee Hinton. All right, Trustee Hinton and Trustee Reyes Salinas, then we'll transition to our last item for the morning.
Thank you. I know that I was a part of this task force, but was unable to really engage in it due to class conflicts and such. So I do have a question. In regards to these recommendations, where does this put us in addressing our funding gap and related to our budget requests?
That is the very next topic to come up.
Okay, great.
So save that question, and I'll turn to you first.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mine is just a recommendation for the next time this committee reconvenes. I'm really glad that we had a student trustee present in this conversation, but I highly recommend that the California State Student Association also has a spot in this committee. So if we can put that down as well, please.
Great. Thank you, Trustee Reyes Salinas. All right, members, we'll go to our last item, item number 5. It's, again, an information item on the 2018-19 operating budget and consideration of expenditure and revenue options. We have 3 members of the team today: Steve Relier, Lauren Blanchard, and Ryan Storm. I believe, Steve, you are kicking us off.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Trustee Taylor. On the screen is an outline for today's update on the 2018-19 budget. We'll start with Executive Vice Chancellor Lauren Blanchard for a report on the current year investments in the graduation initiative. Those investments were possible because of the tuition increase adopted by the board last March. A statutorily required report on this topic was provided to the state of California in January and is included in your material. After Lauren's presentation, I'll review the principles for our 2018-19 budget planning, and then Assistant Vice Chancellor Ryan Storm will provide a recap of how the trustees' 2018-19 budget compares to the projected allocation from the state, He'll provide an update on the hearings and work being done in Sacramento since our last board meeting. And finally, he'll lead us through a summary of potential options for narrowing the gap between our budget needs and the state's current funding proposal for 2018-19. Now I'll turn it over to Executive Vice Chancellor Lauren Blanchard.
Thank you so much, Steve. As you will recall, the tuition increase that you adopted last March was vitally important to funding the first full year of the graduation initiative. Part of your action on tuition required a report on how these funds were invested. The report lays out the strategies undertaken by our 23 campuses to offer more courses, hire more tenure-track faculty, and invest in other academic and student support services in order to make progress on our graduation initiative goals. A total of $88 million in investments were made in 2017-2018. Of the $88 million, $75 million was supplied by last year's tuition increase, and $13 million came from existing campus budgets that were reprioritized for this very important initiative. Campuses have tentatively reported plans to hire 1,400 new tenure-track faculty by the end of this academic year, and over 25% are new positions, above those made available through retirements and separations. The hiring of more faculty also means that campuses can offer more course sections in order to increase student course loads each term. Over 3,200 new course sections were added to the schedule for this academic year, equating to over 90,000 new seats for students. Another key strategy to improve retention and increase graduation rates has been to improve our advisor-to-student ratio. We added 228 new advisors just this academic year. These professionals allow students to move through their academic careers at the CSU more efficiently through a combination of better e-advising technologies and regular engagement and communication, a best practice that is especially important for our first-generation students. The last category of investments made by campuses this year are in the area of student academic and support services that really help to ensure our campuses are meeting the specific needs of their respective student populations. While it is too soon at this point to report on the impact of these investments on our graduation rates, we know that these strategies have helped to increase our average unit load, which is a leading indicator of future graduation rate successes. We also know that when students are given more opportunities to work with full-time faculty, and when students are provided advising and other support structures, they keep or put students on a timely path to degree. Sustaining momentum on the graduation initiative is vitally important to our students and to the state. You certainly will hear more about this tomorrow during the Public Policy Institute of California's presentation. At this time, I'll turn it back over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Dr. Blanchard. Before I turn it over to Ryan, let's quickly review our 2018-19 budget principles that you can see on this slide. CSU's first priority and commitment is to make the case with state leaders between now and June that the CSU's budget for 2018-19 is essential for students and for California. The CSU is a proven engine for upward mobility of students and economic strength in California, and its impact in that regard has been the subject of national attention and has made CSU a model across the country. There simply is no better or more cost-effective way of ensuring a strong California than a modest investment in the university, because student success is, in fact, the state's success. And a key element of the trustees' budget is the graduation initiative. As Dr. Blanchard outlined, its value to California is to increase access and move more students more quickly through to completion of their degrees. As currently proposed, a 1.4% increase to the CSU operating budget does not even allow for the agreed upon fair compensation of CSU's faculty and staff. To maintain academic excellence and to remain one of the most affordable higher education institutions in the country, the university needs to reach a common understanding with the legislature and the governor that a fully funded CSU in 2018-19 will enable ambitious but necessary student success goals to be achieved. I'll now ask Ryan to provide an update on the state budget and outline for you again the options for closing the budget gap. Ryan?
Thank you, Steve. You'll recall from our January meeting that the governor's budget proposal included a $92 million increase for the CSU, which creates a budget gap of $171 million between the CSU budget plan that you approved in November and the current state budget proposal. Not only is there a significant gap between the two, but it is $61 million short of our obligatory compensation and mandatory cost increases Steve just mentioned. During February and March, there have been a handful of budget hearings in the Assembly and Senate, but it is too early in the process for either house to take any action on the budget. The focus of these hearings is to gather some preliminary information and perspectives from the CSU and others before the committees begin to take any final actions. In general, these hearings have involved discussions of the priorities that we share with the legislature: student access, high-quality learning environments, and increased student achievement and success. Additionally, both the Advocacy and State Relations Office and my office have been heavily engaged in advocacy with both individual members and staff. Early in February, the Assembly held an oversight hearing on closing the degree gap. Executive Vice Chancellors Lauren Blanchard and Steve Relier participated in the hearing, shared our efforts to make California's workforce needs, and shared the strategies, the successes, and the importance of sustaining funding for our graduation initiative efforts. Their testimony was well received, and we have since followed up with individual members and their staff to ensure that they are aware of the link between our budget request and the continued momentum of our student success efforts. We've also been heavily engaged with Budget Committee and leadership staff, answering questions, providing background, and helping frame and guide the discussions around the CSU budget as they prepare agendas and topics for upcoming hearings. Now, in the midst of all of this, the Advocacy and State Relations Office has organized several focused advocacy events that have elevated the important contributions of our CSU system and campuses and the critical link to our budget request. Assistant Vice Chancellor Kathleen Chavira will provide a more detailed update later today. And our strategic budget advocacy efforts will intensify as we approach May and June, when the legislature and governor will make the final decisions on our budget. Now, in light of ongoing discussions, we must consider options for closing the budget gap. Again, we will consider the points you raised today, as well as consider other factors with the goal of returning to you at a later meeting with a recommended plan. Over the past many months, we collected ideas from many CSU stakeholders on ways to close the gap. All of them are meaningful, but as you will see later, only a handful of them can be considered legitimate solutions to help narrow the 2018-19 budget gap. This slide will focus on the revenue options, and in a moment we will focus on the expenditure options. So there are two short-term revenue options, meaning these options could have an immediate impact on our 18-19 budget plan. Our focused and primary strategy is to work with our partners in Sacramento to increase the investment in the CSU. An additional $61 million would cover our fixed costs, and another $75 million would fully fund the second year of the graduation initiative. Another option is to increase tuition. This option would help cover a portion of the budget plan, and our lowest income, qualified for financial aid students would not be impacted by the increase. That would be about 63% of our undergraduate student population. So I mentioned that our lowest income students wouldn't be affected by that increase. I think on the other side, the downside is that the rest of the student population, or that about 37% of student population, would have to pay a $228 per year tuition increase. So the two options I mentioned, pursuing additional state funding and a possible tuition increase, these two options are not mutually exclusive. A small increase in state appropriation with a small increase in tuition would also help close that gap. There are also long-term revenue options, meaning these options would have little or no immediate impact on the 18-19 budget plan. Instead, they are options that could begin to help with financial sustainability over the long term, perhaps over a 2 to 3 year window. One option is to jump ahead to 2019-20 to the next gubernatorial administration and consider a multi-year budget that includes stable funding increases. Depending on the amount negotiated against projected cost increases, a small, predictable multi-year tuition plan might also be necessary. The next two options are items that we regularly pursue, but are not practical options for today's budget predicament. They are public-private partnerships, or what we call P3s, and increased philanthropic giving to the university. For those P3s, these are mostly enterprise activities like housing, parking, and other unique facility needs of campuses. Nearly all philanthropic donations are restricted to the wishes of the donor. So these two options rarely, if ever, create excess revenue that could be used for general operating purposes, like our budget plan. But they both help meet specific needs and enhancements of our campuses. So this slide focuses on the expenditure options. The upside for all of these options is that they could contain costs, reduce costs, or avoid future costs. In the short term, there are options, but they will not advance student success. The first would be to slow recruitment of faculty and support staff going forward. The downside is a delay in adding new course sections, which works against the graduation initiative. While there may not be new incremental funding for the graduation initiative, campus leadership would continue to use the $75 million from the current year of those investments to protect the progress made so far. Another option is to redesign the state university grant program and reduce the expenditures in ways that do not harm current students. The downside is that prospective students could be negatively impacted, and there could be fewer students with financial aid, thereby causing them to work more and slow progress to degree or incur debt. Another option is not investing any new funds in the graduation initiative, in enrollment increases, or infrastructure needs of the university like deferred maintenance. We've talked a lot about the graduation initiative so far. In a moment, we'll cover enrollment, but let's focus briefly on infrastructure. Without having operating budget dollars for infrastructure needs to complement our limited funds that were freed up by the restructuring of our State Public Works Board bond debt, we will make less progress on acute, high-need deferred maintenance and improvements of academic buildings and core campus utilities. Now, there are three long-term expenditure options that would have little or no immediate impact on the 18-19 budget plan. As collective bargaining agreements open in the future, one option could be to shift more of the financial responsibility for retirement and healthcare costs to employees. The downside is that this is a longer-term option that would be subject to collective bargaining and somewhat dependent on state law changes. Another option would be to reduce student enrollment. That would likely impact prospective first-time freshmen and transfer students. There are some immediate cost savings from reducing enrollment, but much of the savings would take more than 1 year to achieve, and we are already in the process of admitting students for the upcoming academic year. The downside is that it further restricts access to qualified applicants and could interfere with our many promise programs and educational partnerships, which would run contrary to our core values. Still, another option is academic program realignments and eliminations. Campus presidents regularly propose, and the board regularly approves, changes to academic offerings on campuses. This option does not suggest the status quo. Instead, the option suggests a heightened effort to realign or eliminate more programs than usual. It would take several years working with faculty to appropriately realign or eliminate programs and several years more to teach out students and ultimately phase out programs. Now, I've shared a lot of information over the past 2 slides. This summary slide attempts to focus our options to those that are available for 2018-19. So they are, first, make no new investments in parts of our budget plan, such as the second year of the graduation initiative, enrollment growth, and infrastructure. Second, reduce expenses like freezing hiring and altering student financial aid. And third, keep pursuing revenue options, such as additional state funding and tuition, or a hybrid approach. We seek your feedback on these options as the Chancellor considers contingency plans over the next few months. And Steve has some closing comments.
Thank you, Ryan. So many of these options have some very negative effects on the university and its students, as well as on faculty and staff. And so we will consider them carefully, including the board's feedback. In the end, the Chancellor's Office and campus leadership will do their best to mitigate the impact on students, faculty, and staff. But if additional funding is not provided, the goals and timelines of the graduation initiative will be impacted. Thank you, and Dr. Blanchard, Ryan, and myself will be available for questions.
Okay, members, now the time to ask questions. We're going to start with Trustee Hinton because I promised her she'd go first. Since I'm chair, I'm going to go second. I got Trustee Nylon, Day, Sebelius, and Fagan.
Thank you. So I guess I just will repeat my question from earlier. I'm wondering how the recommendations from the task force are addressing cost efficiency, our budget requests, and the budget gap.
Perhaps I can start. The task force recommendations are a combination of some things that were implemented and did have fairly quick impact. So, for example, going after ways of reducing the cost of purchasing, combining computing resources in order to reduce costs. Those kind of things are helping us keep the gap to where it is. For 2018-19, as Ryan indicated on his summary slide of options, there's only so many things that we can do in the very short run that will impact that. Some of the things that are in the task force are some of the recommendations of the task force are longer term and will help in future years. Lieutenant Governor Newsom did mention one of the task force recommendations, which we're very interested in, which is the community authority to buy utilities on the market as opposed to through the investor-owned utilities. That has a potential very big impact, but is going to take longer than the 2018-19 year to achieve, and will probably require statutory and regulatory reform to help us do that. So we're going to pursue everything both in the short term and the long term. Some of those things that did require regulatory changes were made, like the investment authority that was in the task force report. And Trustee Taylor is actually later this week chairing a committee that is overseeing the implementation of that authority, and that will provide some, I think, significant revenue relief, but again, will not address the 18-19 year. Will address future years.
Trustee Hinton, if I may, with respect to the sustainability report of a few years ago, and then it's refreshed recently, as discussed earlier, we've been able to avoid $16 million in annually from electronic library resources, $6 million in cost reductions from academic technology contracts and learning management systems, $1.2 million in cost avoidance from our efficiency projects, $3 million obtained in incentive funding for energy efficiency partnerships, $3 million in cost reductions for electricity purchase contracts, $2 million in cost reductions on facilities and maintenance products, $2.6 in cost reductions on medical supplies and lab equipment, $4 million in cost reductions on construction bidding process, $4.6 million in cost reductions on print advertising, $7.5 million in cost avoidance from communications infrastructure, $15.7 million in cost avoidance on hardware and software purchases, $1.8 million in cost savings from combining physical data center and cloud platform, $12.5 million in cost savings from insurance acquisitions, $8 million in cost reductions on financial auditors, bank card services, office supplies and printers, and $1 million in cost avoidance from catalog-based purchasing, and that's all before this unprecedented CSU-UC partnership to reduce procurement costs going forward even more.
Yes, follow-up, Trustee Hinton?
Is there anywhere where I can access that list? I tried to jot it down, but that was very quick. It would be great if all of us could have access to that information as well.
It's coming in first-class delivery.
Great. And I also do have another question. As far as the graduation initiative and the tuition increase last year, thank you very much, Chancellor White. I think that it hasn't quite been clear what the tuition increase was used for, whether it was tenure density or graduation initiative. I feel like none of us have a clear understanding of that. If someone could address that, please.
Yes, I'll be happy to address that. As you may recall, that there was an amendment made to the tuition proposal when it was passed last year, and that amendment made it very clear that the dollars would be spent in 3 areas. Number one would be the hiring of more faculty members. Secondly, it would be to strengthen our advising infrastructure for the CSU. And thirdly, it would be an opportunity for campuses to engage in looking carefully at any high impact practice that was making an impact on their student success efforts at their respective campus, or one that they were interested in piloting that was working at an alternate campus. So those were the 3 areas that were outlined for which the $75 million were to be used.
And Mr. Blanchard, just to be super clear, you presented a slide earlier where you talked about faculty hires and more advisor hires. Those are net positions?
Correct.
So, because we have faculty retiring every year, so
Right.
not only are we replacing them, those that retire, but also adding to the number of tenure track faculty.
That's absolutely correct.
Great, thank you. Okay, couple of questions. And Ryan, I think I'm a little bit confused on your slides. Under expenditure options, you talk about long-term 2019-20 enrollment management, either a freeze or reduce. But on 18-19, you say one of the forego new investments is enrollment growth. Just to be super clear, do we still have an opportunity for this coming year, 18-19, to limit enrollment above and beyond what might otherwise be there?
I think from the vantage point of our plan, our budget plan suggested that if we were to receive full funding from the state, we'd be able to grow enrollment by about 3,600 full-time equivalent students. I think the challenge is if you are trying to reduce the current enrollment levels. That's the challenge that I was speaking to in the presentation, was that it takes a while for those sorts of cost savings to manifest themselves, particularly in the fact that we've already begun to admit a number of students for the fall already.
Right. Okay. So in reading, and I appreciate, by the way, the update in the materials on attachment A, the update and how we're doing on the graduation initiative and like, I think for me, and I'd like you to disabuse me of this notion, the crux of part of our challenges is on page 9, item 3.3, where we talk about changes in enrollment patterns, where we talk about, hey, over a certain period, the state budget's provided only baseline resources for slightly more than 5,000 FTE, but we added 40,000 FTE. So I just want to make sure super clear that we got 40,000 more students, but we're really only funded for 5,000 more. Am I missing something here? I mean, have we basically added 35,000 students without the dough to provide a quality education for them?
No, I wouldn't say that we have. I would say that we have added funding. We've received funding from the state and have been able to.
Yeah, we've received funding from the state
Right.
for slightly more than 5,000 of these FTEs, so we could grow enrollment by 5,000 is the way I read this paragraph. But it says we've added 40,000 additional FTEs.
Do you want to jump in?
What am I missing here? We're growing students faster than we're getting money from the state to pay them. I think that's what I'm trying to get at.
So I'm happy to respond to a little bit of that as well, sort of in the context of enrollment. So some of that.
Please
I'm
introduce
sorry.
yourself for the
Nathan
camera.
Evans, Chief of Staff for Academic and Student Affairs. Some aspect of that is our new headcount, new students. So yes, you are sort of articulating the difference in terms of what the state has explicitly said this is for enrollment growth versus the net enrollment growth. Some of that is in more bodies on campuses than existed 5 years ago. But other, and particularly as we talk about in the context of graduation initiative, it is increased unit load taking by students. So it is a combination of net headcount increase, but also in the spirit of the graduation initiative and moving more students to degree in a more timely fashion, it is more students taking more units as well.
So that mean students are transitioning from part-time to full-time in terms of their unit load?
We are seeing some of that, but even full-time students moving from 12 units, which is the minimum for financial aid, closer to 15 units, which is necessary to graduate in 4 years.
Okay. Ultimately, I think, one of the things I need to get a better handle on, and I appreciate the staff helping me, is as we look at the different levers we have to pull to resolve the deficit we're looking at for next fiscal year that currently sits at about $61 million. And then, of course, any follow-on challenges the years thereafter. To what extent are enrollment cuts, vis-a-vis where we stand today, a solution to part of that problem? And I would very much appreciate at the next meeting having a clear explanation on if we were to cut 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 FTE, what is the resulting savings in terms of, a smaller footprint for the CSU in terms of faculty, staff, and others? Okay, I've got Trustee Nylon, Day, Sebelius, Fagan, and Reyes Salinas, and then Carney and Morales following.
Thank you, Chairman Taylor. My question relates to our overall philosophy of reductions. As we start thinking about reducing our expenditures, we need to think about what is the core function that we do, and then recognize that that which is not core is extraneous, and extraneous should be our first area where we cut. It's that old trite saying, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. So anything that doesn't exist that's the main thing, we need to think about our strategy should be to attack those first rather than attack the very mission of what we're doing. And a couple examples is as part of the my responsibility for campus planning, buildings, and ground. We have an environmental sustainability report brought to you. The question is the California State University system mission to save the environment or to educate children? Saving the environment costs money. Should we not do that so that we can educate our students? The other thing is State University Grant Program. That is, I've been told, a $700 million cost to the CSU system. Is the CSU system's mission to provide financial aid, or is it to educate? And I would suggest it is to educate. So as we look at what it is that we want to pay attention to, let's remember, I think, what our central core mission is, and then consider those things that may be extraneous, desirable as they may be, want them, love them, but should we do them anymore, or should we just reduce them somewhat? And so what I would like as my recommendation to you is to figure out what is our strategy, because it doesn't make sense to do all the things all at the same time. What are our strategic elements, and why are we doing them, and how do they then position us to meet our mission, even though we are reducing our expenditures or increasing revenues? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Trustee Nylon. Steve, I realize we're short on time, but we're going to end up going for a while longer. It'd be, I think, very useful for you to explain for the new trustees in particular what the State University Grant is. As you know, I've referred to it as the Robin Hood system financial aid at CSU, where we take money from the middle-class students to provide financial aid for the low-income students. You probably have a more academic explanation.
Actually, Chair Taylor, your explanation is pretty good. I think it's essentially that what we do is when we charge tuition, there's a portion of that tuition which goes into a university-provided financial aid program. And that tuition is combined with other forms of financial aid that come from the state and the federal government to help offset for those students who have the greatest need their educational expenses. So it's as was mentioned earlier, I think it's now up to about $700 million that is over the years has been collected from the full tuition that we charge students in order to put into a pot that then contributes to the financial aid that a student receives who has the greatest need. And so as we adjust tuition upward, as Ryan had mentioned previously, there is a large portion of students who actually will not pay that increase in tuition. Approximately 2/3 of those students won't pay that tuition because of the amount of the money that we take off the top of any tuition increase that then goes into that financial aid program.
Great, thank you. Let's continue on. Trustee Day, Sebelius, Fagan, Reyes, Salinas, Carney, Morales, and Eisen.
So on that note of the SUGs, one of my questions relates to, well, Trustee Carney and I we were invited to speak to Associate Academic Senate last week, and SUGs was a big issue of discussion, so I was going to talk to Steve afterwards, but I think we'd like to loop back to them as well as this full board to get a better understanding of that program so that we're all speaking coherently. Another issue they raised, and I don't have my notes from the session in front of me, but it had to do with this slide of the 400 new tenure track faculty for the graduation initiative, and going to page 4 of your attachment A on this item. So just so I can understand it, and then I'm looking at Christine Miller, so she can certainly jump in if I get this wrong, but the 400 tenure track, is that specifically related to graduation initiative, or is that related to overall, retirements and other faculty leaving and hiring 700? Is the 400 a net number? Is it a gross number? And help walk us through that, because as I'm reading under 2.0.1, it does seem a little bit confusing when you talk about 25%, which would be 140 net. Is that 140 or the 25% of the 700? And then how does that relate back to graduation initiative? So if you can clarify that real quickly. I know we're short on time.
Yep, so it's a total, thank you, first of all, it's a total of 1,400 new faculty that are in the process of either have been hired or being hired, for which, when you take into consideration retirements and resignations, that it's 400 new net of that 1,400. Does that make sense?
Okay, so system-wide, 1,400 new positions, 400 of those are net.
For 17-18, 1,400, and then of that, 400 net new.
And so is that 400, that's system-wide, that's not dedicated just to graduation initiative?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
The 400 net is system-wide, not necessarily dedicated to the graduation initiative.
Well, it's definitely dedicated to the graduation initiative because of the fact that it's the way that we've been able to increase the unit load, meaning that the number of course sections that have now been offered has been attributed directly to being able to hire more faculty and have them directly in those classrooms.
Understood. So the net position, though, is improving the tenure density on our campuses. And of course,
it's improving tenure density, but it's also improving the opportunities for more students to have course sections where they can complete up to 15 hours per semester.
And then a similar question under section 2.2 on advising. You talk about 142 or 228. Is that a net number as well?
That's correct. It is also a net number.
And then my only other question under section 2.3, these sub paragraphs, they seem a little bit more nebulous to me than the specifics in the preceding paragraph. So maybe in the future we could flesh that out to really prove with hard data what we're actually doing in those sections, because it's a pretty big chunk of money. And then my last question, we talked about roughly 100,000 student graduates, increase of 7,000 year over year, which is 7%. I'm just curious, how does that correlate to, we keep talking about our budget and talking about enrollment growth, just for the public to understand, 2 or 3% enrollment growth would be 2,000 or 3,000 students, but yet we've increased the number of graduates by 7,000 year over year. Can you just explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, that's one we'll have to get back to you on. I don't have that information directly handy.
Okay, let's go. Trustee Sebelius, followed by Trustee Fagan.
To some degree, Trustee Taylor and Trustee Day have preempted my question that also related to state university grants. Like other trustees, I'm often confronted with faculty members and also statewide senators who want more information on why the state university grants are not fully funded, and some are of the belief that they would yield an additional $750 million to our system if they were appropriately or fully funded. So I want to jump on Trustee Day's request. If you ever have a session on illuminating the complexity of the state university grants, please include me on it so I can relay significant information accurately.
Great, thank you. Trustee Fagan, followed by Trustee Reyes-Salinas.
I'd like to kind of pick up on Trustee Nyland and almost everybody else, I think, to a little bit. And that is, at least in my view, or concern, it seems like we're being provided a very narrow option, as Peter was talking about pushing levers, and Trustee Nyland is talking about different aspects. It appears that the presentation to some degree, and this is a little simplification, is tuition or graduation initiative. And when you have a $7 billion budget, even though a significant portion is beyond our control about what we do with it, it stretches credibility to think that there aren't a lot of other areas that we can and should be looking at before we go to the extreme, which is tuition. And I personally feel like that's not being done. I know that Chancellor White has provided us a very impressive list of cuts that have been done, and I applaud that. But there's more to be done. There's things I've seen that I would like. And part of the problem, I think, is that maybe one thing is $1 million and another thing is $2 million, and you say, you know, we've got these hundreds of millions of dollars to deal with. But I think it was Pat Brown who might have said, you know, $1 million there and $1 million there, and pretty soon you're talking real money. So the reality is even small things might be there. One other thing that I think has been a little disappointing is on the revenue end. It's pretty much either tuition or state funding. And a question I have is about more imaginative other alternatives. A while back, I proposed or suggested an idea about, and this is just one example, and I think a lot of trustees and a lot of stakeholders would have other ideas, but this one idea was a question about, you know, we have 600,000 people on our campuses every day, Monday through Friday, walking along these routes, and they're trapped. They can't not go by these general areas like lampposts and stuff. And you look at LAX and you look at major airports, and there's sometimes tasteful advertising throughout, and it's a public place with a lot of folks going through these areas, and possibly advertisers who might be interested in using opportunities to communicate to those people. Now, I understand in the ideal world, we're in the world of education, and we try to avoid that because we don't want to do that, unless you're at a football game. But I proposed that, and it was basically went nowhere. I never got a response on that. I still think something like that is worth looking at. That may not work. It may have, you know, be worthless. Maybe nobody's interested in it. But it's a mindset. It's a kind of lack of emphasis on new ideas and new directions to try and make money. So I'd still urge the administration to try and take a look at that as a possibility. And that would be a long-term benefit, and who knows if it would work. So the immediate needs obviously are pressing. But we're just looking at these options as either or, and Peter's levers and Trustees Nylon's looking at all these different options. I really urge us to try to look at expanding all those thoughts and not just going either or.
Thank you, Trustee Fagan. I will say, if the idea of that advertising, University of California did do a study on this about 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago. And I'm sure they'd be more than happy to share that with us. And you might grab those results and examine them for their potentiality today. Let's go Trustee Reyes-Salinas and then Trustee Carney, Morales-Eisen.
Thank you. And I have a question and some important comments after my question, but as many of our trustees here, I have full confidence on the graduation initiative and what it can do to our students. And I know it's going to help with tenure faculty, our advisement, and everything else it has. But as we are approaching our budget ask, I'm also a bit impatient. And what I'm asking now from our staff is, can we get a full commitment of when we will have data on how we're actually improving students' lives, because we don't only owe that to our legislators when we're asking for more funding, but we owe it for the students that pay for that tuition increase. So can we get a commitment of when that will happen?
Yes, you can get a commitment to ensuring that we can provide more clarity on the direct impacts, especially in the third category that we just heard Trustee Day mention. The third category that looks specifically at high impact practices that tie in more with the lives of students, the well-being of students, and exactly what impact is that making. But also keep in mind as well that the goal of the graduation initiative as well is to do three things. One is obviously to improve our graduation rates, for which we will be able to provide evidence of that at the time that it's going to be available. The second goal of the graduation initiative is to close equity gaps across the system. And so, again, we'll be able to provide evidence there when the time comes during the fall semester where we'll be able to have gathered that data. And the third is to ensure that we've got more students that are graduating that are capable of moving directly into the California workforce in order to meet the growing need for more students to meet those workforce needs as prescribed by the Public Policy Institute of California, which we'll hear more about tomorrow. So those are the three essential goals that we can show evidence of how the graduation initiative is directly impacting those three areas, but also looking at the student well-being aspect of it as well.
Thank you. And I'm here in fall semester, so I think we're all excited to hear and see that data. My comments are as we're talking about the short-term and long-term options, something that we're forgetting when we're talking about cutting SUG and the redesign of SUG. And that is the most vulnerable students we have in our system that are the primary beneficiaries of SUG, and that's our undocumented students. That's the main reason they stay in the CSU, because of the state university grant. So it's definitely something that we need to keep in mind as we're having these discussions of cutting the state university grant. Another thing is that Trustee Hinton and I went to the California Higher Education Student Summit with CSSA, that CSSA host, and we asked our students, we had 23 campuses, 23 campuses represented with their student leadership, and we walked them through our budget priorities. We named the 5 priorities, and we explained them very carefully, and asked them, if you could prioritize one priority on your campus, which one would it be? You could only choose one, and you must reach consensus on your campus. And 0 students, 0 campuses wanted enrollment growth. 1 voted for mandatory cost, 4 for employee compensation, 5 for the graduation initiative, and 13 campuses for infrastructure. So when we're referring to cutting or foregoing our infrastructure needs, that should be a definite no. Our campuses are literally falling apart, and I am very confident of the word literally this time around, because they are falling apart. So as we're thinking about all of these options, please keep those 2 comments in mind. Thank you.
Very well stated. Trustee Salinas, thank you. On the infrastructure front, I'd remind everybody on the board that the new investment authority that we got granted to us from the legislature allows us to take our extra earnings from our investment portfolio, now that we can actually invest like normal organizations, and requires us to put that directly into deferred maintenance. I'll be honest, I don't think it's going to move the needle in fiscal year 18-19 because I guess we're making our first investment this month. But for fiscal 19-20, I think we're going to have some additional funding that we can direct straight to that. And over the long term, I hope whittle away at our deferred maintenance problems. Let's go Trustee, I have Carney, Morales, and then Eisen.
So this is kind of a follow-up to what Trustees Hinton and Reyes were talking about. When we, with reluctance, adopted the tuition increase a year ago, this meeting, a part of that was that we were to have an annual report on what the money was spent on. And I take it that this report to the legislature is the report to the board on what that was
That is correct,
spent
yes.
on. And it's fine with this trustee if this report wasn't really addressed to us. But frankly, I think we should readdress this report to the students who paid for this. And I think that if the report had highlighted more clearly that this money came almost entirely from a tuition increase, that was a message that actually these people listed on the cover, to whom the cover letter was addressed, that they ought to hear loud and clear. And you were very polite. It's an excellent report, and you were very polite about it. But frankly, they should be told, in my view, in the opening paragraph, that this was paid for by the tuition increase, not from state money. And so I would just, suggest that when we do these reports to the legislature in the future, in which we want to be respectful, we should be honest about who's paying. And then because we have a potentially difficult meeting coming up in May, I think it would be very helpful to have some estimates on what the next phase of the graduation initiative will cost. I know that when it was adopted, there was an estimate that it would be $75 million per year, each year, in recurring funds. And we have this $88 million investment, which is in recurring funds. So what's it going to take on the campuses for the next phase? Thank you.
Very well. Trustee Morales.
Yeah, I want to add to what Trustee Carney has just stated, and I think what Trustee Nylon has stated is a big challenge to all of us trustees, and I think that to have that conversation in terms of priorities, we really need to monetize those, particularly those things. For me, those things that we could forego. For example, all the items in the 2018-2019 options in number one, which is the second year of the graduation initiative, enrollment growth, infrastructure and deferred maintenance, and then on number two, on the reduced expenses, also new hiring and replacement hiring. I think that's the conversation we need to have. It will be a very difficult conversation for me, but I think we need to have that conversation. Anyway, it's unpleasant, but so is also for me the tuition increase. Mm-hmm. So, with all due respect, I would like to see those figures. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Trustee Morales. Trustee Eisen.
So, following up on a few points, it sounds like in May, what we are going to get, because we are now all asking for it, is a very complete list of options with dollar signs next to them. Enrollment, tuition increase, other cuts that we could make in other places, etc., the cost of the graduation initiative. But one of the things that I would like to see on that list is not a general tuition increase, but a non-resident tuition increase, which I know has been considered by some other institutions. I don't know that that will solve any or very much of any problems that we have. But I also want to emphasize that having this complete list, and as complete as Trustee Fagan is suggesting, will also help, I think, with our conversations with the legislature, because we are only thinking about these various options because of a lack of funding. So those options we should be sharing with them so that they are understanding that when we are not funded, these are the options that we're making, and therefore they are the options they are choosing as well for the state of California. That is their partnership with us. They are given the responsibility of determining what should be the allocation of state tax dollars. And so therefore they will have to be knowledgeable about what their decisions are costing the state of California and where. Thank you.
Thank you, Trusteeeisen. CFO Relier, that clear, that request
Yes.
In terms of what
we will
Chair Eisen and others have asked for?
Yeah, we'll come back to the board in May with that kind of list and dollar signs and impacts.
Great, very helpful. All right, members, Lieutenant Governor Newsom?
Yeah, just very briefly, just so I understand clarifications, we talk about that $171 million gap. You mentioned the $75 million, obviously, on the graduation initiative, the $61 million on the fixed costs. So that's about $136 million. And the delta there is what?
You also have enrollment growth increase of about 1%.
So that's not part of the $75 million?
Right.
Okay.
That's a net net cost of about $20 million. And then the last piece of that is $15 million that we would use to debt finance capital improvement projects. About $225 million worth of projects around our campuses, but we would set aside on a recurring basis $15 million for that.
So what's the what is, from your perspective, what are you asking the legislature? And I know all the focus on the governor, and I appreciate that focus on one level, but on another level, we had the Speaker of the Assembly here last year expressing condemnation for the action that this body took as it relates to tuition increase. We went forward anyway. I was hopeful we would delay it and call the question, and candidly, he didn't appreciate my comments that I said, put him on the spot. You know, you're going to come here and express disdain and discourage that action, which I thought was the right thing to say. You got to be held to account in terms of actually following up, supporting our efforts and our cause. And I think they're in the driver's seat, the legislative leaders and the legislature broadly. And I thought the comments that were made to the public were spot on. If not this year, when? And I know there's some assessment. If it's a $7 billion surplus, news to me. Anyway, everyone's got a different number, 6.1, 6.5, 7. A lot of that is heading over to the rainy day reserve, won't be available. Smaller percent will be. A lot of competing interests. I get all that. But I agree this is the moment. And so what are we being targeted in terms of our requests? Are we asking for the entire 171 and hoping to get what we can get? How can we come back? What is the number that we then come back without an agenda item saying tuition?
It's $1 million question.
Yeah. Or
$171 million.
I
think ultimately our position is to go to the state of California and ask for $171 million. That is our position. It has been our position on an advocacy basis throughout the entire cycle since the governor released his request or his proposal. And so our request is for the state to fully fund the budget plan.
And then, and remind me, and forgive me, what was the deferred action on the tuition? What was that net in terms of what we delayed?
The net increase, if this tuition proposal were adopted, would be $70 million.
$70 million.
$70 million, yes.
So if the legislature came back with a $70 million appropriation, the governor concurred, you would still be then arguing for a tuition increase in May?
Let me perhaps insert myself here.
Nice pivot there, Ryan. Well done.
I'm deferring to the boss.
Chancellor White.
Phew. Time for lunch break.
Not quite.
So this is a serious issue, and actually, why don't we just have a chance to think about it as a set of colleagues, including students, just for a moment, okay? So when the trustees put together the budget request in November. It is not a wish list of everything under the sun. It really is the top tier things that really do drive our core functions. And so that's where the ask of 260 million, of which 92 is on the table, so the 171 is missing. You know, those are not, in the view of staff recommendation and trustee action, are not just sort of, gosh, I wish, I hope, right? So that's recognize that this is top tier. Now, I was very interested in the point, George, that you made about your sort of straw poll at the CSSA about if you were king or queen for the day, what one thing would you do? And I didn't get them all down, but enrollment growth got 0 votes. Now, so from a student's perspective, I think that's fully understandable. Is I'm in, take care of me. Make sure I have the courses I need and the support I need to succeed. But this board has a responsibility beyond our current students. We have a moral imperative and a fiduciary imperative to take actions today that allow California to prosper and future students to come in. But if we wanted to say, if we don't get the full ask and we don't want to do tuition, would 0 enrollment be the right thing to do? And that would, on balance, be a more here and now answer, yes, and take that 171 additional we're seeking down by 20, this number right here. Mm-hmm. I was very interested to see that facilities. I mean, some of our learning environments, gosh, it's a public meeting. I was going to use a 4-letter word, and I'm not going to. Our legacy facilities and need improvement. And then compensation for our valued faculty and staff was on the list. And graduation initiative, I mean, that is a word that really has become integrated into the building of capacity and access at the university. The GI is not a set aside over in that office over there, and that's where you will get graduation initiative. But it has become integrated into the high impact practices, the number of support staff and faculty, the increase in tenure track faculty that everybody in this room every time values and thinks is important. So I think we would be remiss on our fiduciary duties to say, well, we had this ask, but we were just kidding. We can actually accept this. But we're also realists. And when we get to the summertime, if what it ultimately comes to the California, then we're going to have to go down this list and say, yep, no more access. But by the time we get to that point, Peter, it is so far into the admission, you know, we're asynchronous. We're 6 months out of sync between what the university does and the UC does and the legislative process. And so I think we have 2 issues here. One is to manage in the very best way in the here and now for 1819. But the most profound solution will be with the next administration to come to a multi-year understanding so we get away from the year-to-year stuff, both for our students and their families and for the state and for our wonderful campus presidents who are trying to hire, plan the curriculum and the delivery of services at the right time in the right place to meet our students where they are. And I think that is sort of the next evolution here. But as I said in my State of the CSU speech in January, which, you know, is likely going to get an Emmy, is there are some things that cost that really do matter to society. And higher education is one of those. So when we come back in the, So I think when we come back in our discussion in May, all of the input by the trustees and by the public input will be taken into consideration. But it's important, however, to realize that they always have, hey, that's what I'm trying to do. Okay, that's what I'm working on. I think it's also important for us to recognize some boundaries here. The legislature, the state of California elected officials in the executive branch and the assembly and the Senate have a very clear role here for public higher education. And we hear that, we know that, and we support that. The trustees have a a special role here in helping set the policies. But at the end of the day, it's these 23 men and women who are responsible for, within the resources that they are able to obtain on their campus, to decide of all the things that that campus is doing in its unique climate and culture, needs of the students, needs of the region in which they serve. They are the ones who ultimately will be making these decisions within their resources on what to invest in, what to slow down, and what to stop. And so I don't want to invite conversation from the legislative side to be micromanaging what a campus leader has to do on her campus. And I want to make sure that the board plays its role very, very importantly on policy and of all these moving parts, which ones we would like to prioritize and which ones we'd like to see go away. But at the end of the day, we have to also let the presidents manage and provide the leadership that they are so capable of doing. And they are the ones who, quite frankly, understand the nuances that are in Arcata that may be different than the nuances in San Diego. So as we go forward, this is important, but everybody has to play a broader understanding of what's at stake here. And that really is serving our students today and our students of tomorrow, and ultimately California's future. And I'll finish with a comment about tomorrow. One of the leaders of the Public Policy Institute of California will be here talking about California's needs, which is, I think, an important discussion for us as California's state university to be mindful of that future as well as managing in the present time.
Okay, members, again, another bite at the apple in May. So unless there is further discussion on this item, Trustee Hinton, I can't tell if you're raising your hand or not. All right, you get the closing comment and then we'll wrap.
Okay. I know that we're limited on time. Part of what I wanted to note is I know that I don't have the formal ability to make a motion, but I feel like each conversation we've had in regard to the budget has been cut off for time, and every time I'm told, oh, we'll be able to talk about it more in January, or we'll be able to talk about it more in March, but here we are in March and we're voting on it in May, so it's not necessarily a chance at another bite of the apple, like we're making the decision. And if it is going to affect legislation, that if they give us the additional $70 million that a tuition increase would generate, and we're still going to be discussing a tuition increase, I feel like that might affect their decision in giving us additional funding. So it seems like a valuable conversation to have before that decision is made. So I don't know if it's possible to go to lunch and come back. I would be willing to stay here all night to be able to have this conversation. So I just feel like in May we're making a decision, a very important decision, and I feel like we haven't fully had a discussion yet. So in May, I would really appreciate more time.
I would love to have Finance Committee go all day, because, you know, finance issues are the crux of what we do as fiduciaries. I think May actually is timely in terms of the calendar when the legislature is addressing this. You know, there's a disconnect, as Chancellor White said, right? Because we've got to make some decisions in May, and they really probably won't get back to us until June. And so we're going to have some contingency plans that I think a lot of the discussion today will be presented in May, so we can really kind of weigh pros and cons between the different options.
Yeah, no, I understand that completely. It's just we keep also having this conversation about not having a clear message, and I feel like it was just very clear that we don't have a clear message, that if we get the additional funding from the state, is there still going to be a discussion around a tuition increase? And there's no answer to that. So it seems like when we're doing our advocacy efforts, our lobbying efforts, we need to know that answer.
I think to your point, we're getting to that next, because that's half the equation in the conversation on governmental relations, which is our message and what we've been undertaking for the last 2 months and what we'll be doing up in Sacramento with all aspects of the CSU family. That's a big part of the conversation, and we're going to be discussing that next on our agenda. So I appreciate the point. That's very well taken.
Trustee Hinton, if the trustee budget is funded fully by the state of California, there will be no tuition increase.
I understand that, and that's what we're all hopeful for, but that's not what Newsom has said, that if we get the 70 million additional, is there still going to be a conversation about a tuition increase? And that was not answered. And I know that we're short on time, but Chancellor White, you had said that that this isn't a wish list, that we need to cover our core functions. So if the 70 million covers the core functions, then we're talking about a tuition increase for a wish list. So that is a really important conversation to have.
Trustee Hinton, those are decisions that are within the purview of this board, and this board will be having those discussions in May. So we're going to be we're lobbying heavily and strongly for our full financial request from the state. A lot of that won't be known until May, but we'll have discussions in May about what choices we have for this board to face, and that may or may not include new revenue. It may include cuts. It may include reducing priorities or reallocating priorities in the past. All of those are on the table.
Okay, I appreciate that. Then I guess I would just ask that we have more time allotted to this committee in May, please.
I second that, just for the record. Trustee Day, it's a pleasure for me to return the gavel to you, only 51 minutes behind schedule.
Thank you. With that, we will adjourn until 1 p.m., where we will then take up the Committee on Educational Policy.